So the New York media scene was this incredibly glamorous, incredibly wealthy, shiny thing. And we're talking bright lights, big city, the heyday of Vanity Fair, constant lunching. You know, it really was the stereotype that you might think of from afar. And I caught the tail end of that when I moved here in the early 90s. And I got to see it all sort of fall apart.
Around 2004, 2005, people who run print news organizations began to realize the users are going online, the revenues are dropping, it's not cyclical, and they're not coming back, and young people aren't ever going to be print newspaper readers. Then a new phase began when journalists began to fear for their future, but also begin to resent the online world.
I think the way we consume news is, absolutely never going to be the same again.
10 years ago, I myself remember running to the curb to get the latest copy of the Times. Now it would be bizarre if a big story broke and you went to the Times 10 minutes later and the update wasn't already there.
I think in the last 5 to 6 years, there has been a realization that the approaches of companies like Google, Flickr, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, etc., they were seen probably by the media industry as we're not in the same business, and yet essentially they are. There's a very sharp realization in legacy media businesses that they don't necessarily have the skills, and they haven't done the right thinking to get them into the same place as a lot of the digital businesses that have grown very, very rapidly.
The internet is here, and it's undeniable. Those who are in the media industry and not embracing social media are being irresponsible. They're being irresponsible capitalists, they're being irresponsible journalists. The problems in traditional media are cultural, they're not technological or journalistic. So we're not just changing how people consume information, we literally will think about the world in which we engage in different ways.
There's been a huge loss of jobs and security, and that's now normal. A lot of the resistance within old-style print newsrooms has by necessity just been overcome.
It is still a very destabilising time for people who grew up with a very set idea of how their journalistic life was going to pan out, and to get to the kind of age that I am now, sort of your mid-40s, where you're not that young anymore, but you can't see your retirement check on the horizon. That's a really unpleasant place to be.
Sadly, not even the largest magazines in the world know what the future of magazines is going to be. And so, people like myself who are early, mid point of their career, there's a real hunger to go out there and experiment and do something new and do something different and just try and figure out these things on our own, because clearly, if we don't figure some things out, we're not going to be having much of a paycheck.
Longshot Magazine is an experiment that we do to make a magazine in 48 hours.
You have people talking about old media and new media, and a lot of the new media is only online. And what we're looking at is how can you take the best of the legacy and the best of what's new and make something at the junction of those that's even more innovative.
Almost all of the tools that we use to create this magazine didn't exist 5 years ago. So what we do is we take submissions from around the world that are submitted in the course of 24 hours, and then we edit together a magazine.
Yeah, the three of us were in San Francisco, and we had a copy of a magazine that had been produced by MagCloud, and it was a bunch of aggregated photos from the dust storm in Australia, and it had been done print on demand, and we were kind of interested in that, so we essentially asked ourselves, what could we do using this super low overhead approach.
So it's Friday night. We kicked off this theme about 6 hours ago. We're at Gawker in Manhattan. We've got about 30 people. There's all the people working on the magazine, doing the print design, working on those things. We've got the website, all the people building the website, which they're doing fresh for this issue. And then we've got Longshot Radio. I think the mood is buoyant at this point. I mean, people are starting to go through the early submissions, putting energy in their reserve backpack for tomorrow.
I think all news organizations are feeling their way, and I think everybody to an extent is throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks.
I do go back to 2008 and 2009, and it really was a dark time here in New York. Even though we didn't have the horrific real estate crash that the rest of the country had, people shed employees willy-nilly. It was a slaughterhouse.
There are a lot of independent news organizations cropping up, most of which tend to be digital only.
The idea was that there was all this creative energy out there, and that if we came together without a lot of money, we could actually produce, a real newspaper. I mean, we call it an online newspaper, but it's also kind of an online experiment in that, we're willing to play with different revenue models, willing to try new things.
Some of the first cuts to happen were investigative journalists because their work is very time-consuming. If there was anything in need in American journalism, it was investigative journalism.
We launched All in spring of 2009. We'd all been laid off, basically. Nobody had a job. And so we actually realized, well, this is actually a great opportunity to no longer work for other people, basically.
We have reporters who are pretty much a one-man band. They have a video camera, they have a still camera, they have their laptop, they are plugged into their community, they're going out and they're reporting their own stories, they're writing their own stories, getting tips on Twitter, they're getting tips, just from people in their local coffee shop. People feel so vested in the stories that happen on their block. There's this sense of ownership and there's this sense of recognition. People feel a sense that they can actually do something about, and that can do something to or for them in a way that really blows a lot of other reporting out of the water, just in terms of the response from the community.
They're freed of a lot of the encumbrances that really are kind of holding down traditional media companies. They don't have a big printing plant. They didn't take on a lot of debt like a lot of newspaper companies did 5 or 6 years ago in order to do a deal.
After submissions close at 3 p.m. on Saturday, things start getting really hectic, because that's the point where we really have to start editing things, we have to start working with art.
I like this story.
It's 7 pages long.
Well, we needed someone who's like a featured, someone who's used to editing a feature to actually do like a normal feature edit on it.
But the Corey is almost done with...
Yeah.
I've read a couple hundred, and it was pretty amazing, actually. It's a funny editing process when you don't communicate with the writer. So I'm trying to very gracefully not molest anyone's copy.
And we start, at that point, building a map of the magazine.
So about 700 full-length submissions and 600 mini submissions coming in via the challenges. And we got a lot of long form this time. I feel like we got a lot of people who wrote substantial pieces.
The cost of entry 10 years ago was so exponentially higher than it is now. Some guy going out and saying, I got laid off, so I want to start a WordPress blog, right? That may be the lowest common denominator answer, but that guy is important. That guy was me, and that guy is you, right? These tools were not available to you 5-10 years ago, right? All of a sudden, you can start a magazine and roll it out in 48 hours. All of media has changed so quickly, it's flattened so quickly that I wonder, if you're dialing between the value of speed versus accuracy in content, where, does it fall on 5 in the middle of the dial, or does it go all the way up to 11?
The weird thing about independent magazine is that there's no way to really reduce the cost. If you print 10,000 issues, they cost the same as if you print 1,000 issues or 500 issues or 1 issue. So we have to limit it. We can't just publish everything.
Fact checking is going on right now.
A lot of us here have been or are professional fact checkers, and the way that we go about fact checking at Longshot is not traditional. It takes 3 weeks to fact check a large feature, and here we're doing it in a matter of hours. Unfortunately, I think a lot of us would like to do a lot more fact checking, but there's not time. It's a Google search, that's really the best we can do.
It was a very quick and dirty way of doing it.
It's not like we don't have the facts. There are a lot of legitimate publications that don't fact check at all, including newspapers. So the fact that we're doing it all is almost like a bonus.
We feel confident the magazine is going to go out, which we always kind of forget, but that's the first thing, right? There's always a possibility this isn't going to work.
By Saturday night, things kind of started to get contentious between Sarah, Alexis, and myself.
Why don't we decide a max page limit right now? Do you want that to be 64, 68?
Because it's how much would 68 be?
It's 15 cents a page plus $1 for the perfect binding. plus a markup.
We want to keep the magazine at about 60 pages max because after that it gets too expensive.
What if we went 15 for the magazine?
What?
This is a niche thing with an audience that is like really interested. So it's like,
So like what you say,
you're gonna buy 15.
Well,
but I mean, is that necessarily true? Like the first one,
That's the 92.
the first one was a $10 which was a $10 issue, sold more than 3 times as many copies as the second one.
Also, now everything is going to be online.
Do we think though?
Which is not going to encourage sales.
Well, but actually, I think counterintuitively it will encourage it because more things will be viral, more things will be tweetable, more things will be out there. I think our problem is getting people to know that it exists.
So if we were to do a 72-page magazine and add the dollar for perfect binding, it's $11.80 with no markup.
I think that's totally
we could
reasonable.
set it, but we could set it at 14. Well, we can figure out the markup.
We can figure the markup later, but I say 72 is our magazine.
I think 72 is a good hard stop.
Yeah. 72 or less.
Over the years, you've heard this phrase, we need to do more with less. Clearly people do less with less. And that's a big problem. I mean, it might sound unimportant, but, local city councils need to be covered, and, local issues will really need to be covered. And in terms of nationally, sure, I think that there's sort of a drift towards, more outlets feeling like they must cover certain stories, and that necessarily means, in an era of shrinking news holes, more stories falling out.
The downside of the shallowness that, yes, we have this fast food news culture now and none of us goes into any depth. I think that is certainly an outcome and a risk, and the question is, how do you deal with that? I don't know. I mean, nobody knows. I think that to an extent the new tools that people are developing will help.
I think the reason they're using these platforms is because they don't have as much time in the day, they're busy with their jobs or their family, and it kind of helps condense and custom creates a feed for them based on the people that are in their social network. Not just friends, but people over time that they develop as trusted sources. And it also broadens their view of the world, because before we had the internet, people watched the nightly news, and you'd only have the 3 main news sources. Now people can self-select what sources are bringing their news to them. And I say that's a good and a bad thing, because I think just by human nature, people like to reinforce their own beliefs, and they may be choosing sources that are simply reinforcing what they already think or believe to be true. One of the things that I think we need to try and do better is, and I say we, I mean just journalists in general, should be cognizant of trying to bring in a lot of different views and let the truth be the arbiter of what's actually the most important thing in that conversation.
Writing and journalism in general has been devalued, I think, and there's so much quantity that the value for any given piece sort of goes down, and writers, the Huffington Post started this thing about not paying writers, and so now sort of the expectations of what a writer can ask for a piece have gone down.
The Huffington Post and Gawker got a lot of flack at the outset, and they got a lot of flack from established journalistic organisations saying this isn't journalism. Well, it is actually, and journalism has always been about aggregating other people's content. Nobody owns an event that happens out there.
I think aggregation makes it so that it appears there are more stories about a given topic, when actually there may not be more facts about a given topic. It may seem like everyone is covering the same story, but really they're just recycling some original sources. At a lot of shops that are only aggregation, there is no advancing to reporting, and it's just repackaging the work of others. And you see a lot of young reporters do a year or two of aggregation, and then at the end of it, they don't have a source book to show for it.
What we're missing in this country now is a concerted, sober effort to do helpful, accurate reporting about the national scene, about politics. It's so commercially successful to do tabloid journalism, celebrity journalism, and that's what's supporting the boring journalism, but it's a little drowned out.
So our stories are made free of charge we give them away free of charge to our partners. And then if other people want to reprint them, they're welcome to. We operate under a Creative Commons license, so people can, as long as they give us full credit and attribution, they can run it themselves. We've worked with almost every major news organization in America, so New York Times, Washington Post, CBS News, NBC News, CNN, Slate, Salon, almost everyone. NPR, Frontline.
It seems unprecedented that media organizations would be working together to bring out content in an increasingly competitive environment. Why do you think that's become the case now?
That's a really great question, because when Paul Steiger, our editor-in-chief, and Steve Engelberg, our managing editor, when they first started this, they thought the biggest problem would be getting people to partner, because they just knew that newsrooms were so competitive, and they knew sharing is not in their DNA. But the reason we think it's worked is because, A, we've brought really great stories to them, stories that hold people accountable, stories that create awareness about an issue that people didn't know about.
I really do wish at the Faster Times that we had more money to go towards reporting. That's the reality, that people are happy to share their opinion on this or that topic for relatively little money, but they're not really happy to work the phones all day and go through 3 rounds of edits to make sure that it's fact-checked properly. And that's why I think it's extremely important that the Times and other major papers continue to exist.
I was talking to my mother and I was saying, there are all these journalists covering wars and there are all these journalists covering politics and they're doing something that's so important. I don't feel like what I'm doing is important. And she said, why is it not important for somebody to have diversion? And that is a really interesting point. Entertainment and diversion is about more than just making people pass a few minutes at work. Sometimes diversion is about making somebody forget about family problems or work problems or whatever problems they have.
By Sunday morning, early, like 3 a.m., we're all sleep deprived and it's really hard to track what's going on. Basically, we'd be just sort of trying to hang on at that point.
One thing that's cool is on the roof here at Gawker, they set up some hammocks. So I think people will get a chance to go knock out for a couple of hours.
Decision made by most publishers 15 years ago or so when they got online that they would make all their content available for free and not charge for it. That now is coming under a lot of question by a number of publishers, as we've seen, most prominently the New York Times.
In a way, you're reaching more people than ever before. Not all of those 25 million are actually paying for the product. So it's a matter of sort of monetizing the ones that aren't and finding new ways to get new revenue into the business.
All the forecasts around digital publishing in 2000, 2001, 2002 were completely wrong. And what they did was they massively underestimated audience and they massively overestimated revenues because they worked entirely on the thinking of models that came before without really thinking about what digital media would do.
So it's no wonder that Social Game's business model outperforms the kind of typical paywall business model. And the typical paywall business model doesn't discriminate properly. If you're a PR person, if you're in the finance industry, if you're a regulator, you'll pay $1,000 a week for the New York Times or Wall Street Journal because you have to. But the vast majority of people will pay nothing. While we're trying to grow the universe of readers, people who care about the content, we definitely want to encourage social sharing as much as possible. We don't want to discourage that behavior. Your biggest advocates for your product should be rewarded for doing that. And maybe you don't have to give them free content. It depends on your specific business. You may be able to give them expertise instead. But if you're unwilling to give them expertise, then the main thing that you have to sell is free content.
Advertisers don't feel that they get the kind of results that they are used to getting from either traditional advertising in print or TV, or that they're getting on places like Google, where you can track your results much more closely. Circulation or subscription revenue has never been that big of a part of most news organizations' overall top line. They've really had a hard time coming up with an advertising formula that's very successful in a digital framework.
The $36,000 magazine glossy page is ridiculous as an advertising tool. It's silly. It doesn't do anything. But something that someone cares enough about to send to their friends is the best kind of advertisement.
We've been dealing with banner ads for the last 15 years, and banner ads suck. Banner ads are awful. I hate banner ads. There's so many more interesting things we can do with that space. Things we do in terms of transmedia content in that space, video, text, really offer people things of value in that space.
There's a political website here that's based in New York City called the Talking Points Memo. And they just announced yesterday that their advertising rose 88% this year over last year. And the fact that they've been able to grow their advertising by almost 100% during a year when the rest of the economy is pretty tough and when most media organizations are seeing their online ads only grow 10 or 15% is really encouraging. They stopped using these big ad networks to sell ads for them. They're doing direct sales where they're going directly to advertisers and saying, you should buy X thousand or million page views this month, and they set a fairly high price.
One thing advertisers are really interested in right now is sponsoring, in a very old-fashioned way, produced content. What we often do is sell those in a package. Like you say, like, okay, you buy out the site for a week on the ads. Say we'll give you that, and then we'll do this series of interviews with people we've always wanted to interview. We're just figuring out in a whole new way how advertisers are going to work with publications, because the system was pretty broken. Everyone's sort of getting ways to make it work actually for both sides, which is unheard of.
We have to unpack that our readers want to be experts. They're paying for content basically for that reason, right? And so what we need to do is we need to turn your outlet from just a place where they get news to the place where they get status for knowing things. We need to start issuing them a series of status credentials. Like, oh, you know what? You know a lot about eating. You eat at a restaurant in New York like once every day. The more of the restaurants you eat at that we review, the higher and higher you rank on the system, the more stuff you earn. You are an expert in restaurant because you read our restaurant section and follow our advice. And so I say this, and the business people in the room go, oh my God, that's an amazing idea. And the editorial guy from the corner of the room says, that is never going to fucking happen. Our editors will never accept the idea that our readers are experts. And I said, well, then I think you have a problem.
Most of these hyper-local sites, especially the independent ones, are really more labor of love. Very few of them are turning much of a profit.
We've got a pretty big pool that we're going to pay people with this time. It'll definitely be over $100 per person, which is great. It's like our first issue, which we sold a lot of and made more money on. We were only able, even with that, we were only able to pay people like $9 per person, which is, I mean, like we've always said, like if you're doing this to get paid, don't do it, you know, because it's not for money. Sarah and Alexis and I, like we lose like quite a bit of money every issue.
There is a view that says news must be sustainable, it must make money, but some news is never going to make money.
Some things aren't inherently monetizable. That's just fine. We shouldn't approach every piece of media or art or human action. If we approach them as commercial endeavors, then we'll fail because our thinking will be limited to what we can monetize. I'm not interested in things that can be monetized. I'm interested in things that are beneficial to humans and beneficial to my neighbors.
And you're also interested in having a job in 10 years' time?
I don't know. That's actually a really interesting question. I have lived in my car. I can live in my tent. I mean, maybe I won't have a job in 10 years. I'm lucky to have a job now. I don't know. Yeah, I'd like to feed myself, and everyone has material desires, but material desires are not the same as material needs. There's been a lot of people laid off in more than just the journalism industry. I think it's kind of self-centered that the media industry would think that they're the only ones. I'm not saying they do think this, but they're not the only ones hurting in this country. A lot of people are much worse off.
I'm not unaware of the cuts, the lack of jobs, feeling that sort of, journalists feel de-skilled. But you can't knock startups who are coming into this with a view of how journalism can be done differently. Without them, I think you would see an ossified model that had absolutely no future.
Sunday morning rolls around and it's absolute chaos. People do get really stressed out sometimes, and sometimes there have been not permanent hard feelings, but people get mad at each other sometimes.
You guys gotta just wait.
Yeah, we understand. We'll sure we're in the loop.
You don't worry.
We were told we'd start copy editing at 9 or 10, but now deadline's in 4 or 5 hours and we haven't started yet, so I think things are getting down to the wire.
I can't find the document.
You know what, I'll make a Google Doc.
No, take the whole thing. This is the only copy we have of it.
Okay.
I promise you guys, I know you don't believe me, but you're gonna get to do your job. You just have to wait. We're getting closer.
I was making the copy changes and Alexis has just stepped in because he has things in his head that he wants in the magazine.
This is a tough fucking job. Really appreciate it.
He's taken it upon himself to do all that. As in give it, just give it to a left.
My latest idea, which is top secret, but I'll share it. They come to the site, they get a pop-up window. We don't, no money for access, just the email address. Once we have their email, we send them a guilt message saying, come on, you're reading our site, we just want a little bit of money. So instead of asking them for the money up front, you just beg them and harass them later. I think that might be the next thing we try. Photos of starving journalists.
Oh my god. Isn't that amazing? That's amazing.
I feel really good. Like that website is a thing of beauty. What we're calling the nag wall, which lets you share, pay, or dismiss to get the content. It's just, it was really, really hard for them to do, and they pulled it off.
Oh my god.
There's the nag, which you can tweet, Facebook, +1, email, pay $1, $5, $20, or just pay nothing. If they want to pay, they can pay.
I think the idea of asking for donations is probably not going to be that effective. The Miami Herald tried this 6 or 7 weeks, and they raised about $1,200. And it was just not a very effective way, at least for a commercial company, to sort of get money.
We don't think the future is in nonprofit journalism. Again, I think it's one way that it can be done. Newspapers ultimately have to change their business model. Now you're going to be able to sell less advertising. You've got to make your newsroom work within those numbers.
Right now we are at a 1.25 million unique page views a month. At this time, we're a completely free website. We definitely have a business model in place, that I'm not in a position to discuss, but we're, on track to be meeting our goals.
It didn't cost any money. So, we made a profit in the second month, but it wasn't a very good profit. I wasn't exactly paying rent. The first year we worked without pay, essentially, give or take. But we made a profit early on, and as that evolved, we paid ourselves back from the giant hole we dug for ourselves personally.
It's not turning a profit, but we have gotten to the point where we have 4 full-time employees, and we have this office which we share, so it feels really good to have gotten to this point. Our first year we just worked in cafes, nobody got paid. My wife was not amused by the fact that I wasn't making any money.
Oh my god, really? Look, we have 2 issues. Oh. Yeah!
That's amazing. Why don't we just fucking tweet that now?
Yeah.
Right? There it is. Do it. What's up? Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Doesn't anybody have a bullhorn? We could go in the room.
We have one of those.
I feel like maybe to the experiment. If we weren't doing it, nothing would go wrong. You know what I'm saying? Cheers!
In the short time I was here, I can say I've never seen anything like this. There were a lot of brilliant, creative people here who did a really good job, and I think it was a worthwhile and successful experiment, even if there wasn't a jubilant ending at exactly 3 p.m.
It's exciting, and I want to do more of it more often. It made me realize, going to the desk job every day isn't enough. This is what makes people work in media. This is what gets people going.
Most people's day jobs suck, even if they're in an awesome media company, even if they're doing exactly what they thought they wanted to be doing. Times are hard, and those Truman Capote go report in the field for 6-month kind of jobs are not around. And so I think we need to find new ways of making this business exciting for us and telling the kind of stories that we love to read and hear and see ourselves.
I don't know if one shot is the answer from a financial perspective, but I think it definitely has a momentum where, if nothing else, it's an opportunity. People who are involved here, I think, see it as an opportunity to do good work.
I think it's a way to prove that you can make something really good and really cool in a short amount of time if you're willing to work hard and hustle and just go at it.
You know, if I wasn't a startup, so maybe in a few years or my next company, I would have pods of websites. They would be an editor and 4 or 5 reporters who were all young and ambitious and hungry with some skills. And you would cover a topic, whether it's sports or whether it's Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. And that's a great model. It gives training to young reporters to prepare them for the world, and it does a great service for readers.
What is nonsense is this current talk about, you know, the death of journalism, or 10 tips journalists can use for social media today, or these hyperbolic blowhards talking about what does journalism mean in the age of social media. It's ridiculous. Humans are inherently social, we're inherently curious, and we're inherently lazy, which means that we want the path of least resistance between people, other people, and information, right? So journalism is never going to die. Journalism is just fine.
Applications to and enrollment in journalism schools has gone up as a number of newspapers have been closing and newsrooms have been shrinking. So that's very interesting.
So we have a career expo here every year where we invite employers to come and to meet our students. And we actually had more employers this year than we've ever had. In fact, we actually ran out of room. Many of those employers were not companies that even existed 5 years ago, whether it's the Huffington Post or a number of other digital outfits. A number of them are traditional companies that are kind of struggling with the transition and are looking for people who are trained both in kind of core journalism skills and values, as well as digital techniques.
You know, there can be a million sites like the Faster Times, but without the hard-hitting reporting, like, you know, I think the whole society really suffers.
No, if the newspapers go down, we're all going down. Like this, it's over. Like, well, it'll be a disaster. There'll be people yelling on Fox News and a bunch of blogs who don't know how to report on City Hall, and democracy will end. So, sorry. But honestly, don't forget the fact that newspapers make a phenomenal amount of money, all told. It's a huge amount of money. They have to spend a lot of money, and they've worked hard to spend less, but they're actually still making money. Like, don't ever let them tell you that. I mean, just because they fired a lot of people, they're making money, but they are. Don't give up yet.
If you feel oppressed by the pace of change, don't. Just accept that you don't know everything. You can't produce the best digital journalism unless you have people who are thinking from the technological aspect as well.
So seeing technology as a tool as opposed to a threat.
Oh yeah, completely. Yes, and also as a creative solution. The point of digital journalism or digital journalism courses, is really to get people to understand in a fairly sort of profound way what can be achieved with the technology, to leave them free to do the part which is absolutely human.
I would just tell any young journalist to take as their assumption that there are a limited number of jobs that pay well enough that you can live off, and you know, maybe that the best, if you want to be a writer and a journalist, maybe the best career path for you is to find another more stable job and then to be able to freelance on the side.
The landscape in the next few years, I think it's fair to say there's going to be more experimentation in terms of brands getting together. Newsweek merged with the Daily Beast, the Huffington Post merged with AOL. I think you're going to see some other deals like that. You might see some more explicit deals between newspapers and TV stations. You can look at the amount of excitement that the iPad generated when it came out as evidence of the thirst and need for this industry to have a compelling business model. And people are going to keep experimenting, until we figure it out or until we all go out of business.
The reason that this event gives me hope for the media industry is that you see how many people care so much about the product that they're producing, which is just like words or images or sound, and they're willing to just go at each other and go out in the world to get what they want and create this art.
Magazine publishing or any kind of publishing isn't limited to these people in high-rises downtown New York. It's something that anyone can do.
back to Australia and you have 48 hours of footage. And
We
it's all
haven't-
people sitting. People saying things like, go back to page 19. I think there should be a comma.